Those of us who cover the Chicago Bears can sometimes get caught up in the nitty-gritty and the day-to-day. So today, I want to get the perspective of someone who did his homework on the Chicago Bears, but might not have the same sort of biases or preconceived notions than those of us who are around the team all the time.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lorin Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Bears. You can like Locked On Bears on Facebook, join the Locked On Bears Facebook group for even more Bears talk, and make sure you hit that subscribe button on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel to keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and we especially love our everydayers that are tuning in 5 days a week for your Bears fix. On the show today, we're going to take advantage of our friends at Locked On NFL Scouting to get more of an outsider's perspective on this Bears team with Joe Marino. He used to work for the Draft Network, now doing Locked On NFL Scouting here on the Podcast Network, so he knows football through and through, but as part of their work on the podcast, they've been going team by team, doing deep dives on the film and the offseason moves for every player and every team. And so this week they did the Chicago Bears as part of their Monday podcast, and I wanted to talk to Joe about Justin Fields, what he saw last season, and what kind of development he still needs to make this upcoming season, the rebuilt Bears offensive line, the new bolstered Bears wide receiving core, some changes in the Bears backfield that Joe's pretty excited about there, and then maybe some concerns on this Bears defense, some question marks up front, and a lot of youth on the back end that could go poorly and could go well depending on how some of these key players develop. Joe knows football. I think there's a lot we can learn from him and from his analysis of this Bears team that I think generally, I really think he's nailing this one on the head. It really aligns with a lot of the kind of things I see, but takes it from a slightly different perspective. So let's jump right in. Joining us now on the Locked On Bears podcast is Joe Marino. He's the host of Locked On Bills here in the Locked On Podcast Network, as you can see by his hat here on the YouTube channel. But he's also the host of Locked On NFL Scouting here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where they look at every team, the entire league, but more from like a team building, roster construction perspective. And of course, they just did a Chicago Bears breakdown for Monday's podcast this week. So we had to have Joe on to talk about it. You can follow him on Twitter at the Joe Marino. Joe, welcome back to Locked On Bears. We just had you on to talk about Tremaine Edmonds not that long ago, but you got back into some Bears tape. How was that experience overall?
Yeah, we were excited to get into the Bears, obviously. Year 2 of Matt Eberflus, year 3 of Justin Fields, a team that has a lot of new pieces, right? A pretty active offseason, whether it was trades, spending a bunch of money on free agents, obviously 10 draft picks added to the mix here. And so this is one of the teams we were excited about. We put it on a Monday for a reason. We figured it would be a good one, and glad to extend the conversation here on Locked On Bears today with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I listened through you and Kyle talking about it, and first of all, like big picture, agreed with the vast majority of it. I really think you guys were spot on. So I can't encourage listeners enough to go check out that podcast on Locked On NFL Scouting, wherever you get your podcasts or on YouTube. Let's start with Justin Fields, though, because I think I really like the way you guys talked about Fields in particular, right? I think it's the right sort of nuanced approach of like, here's so much we hear either like, oh, he's going to be the MVP this year, or he's terrible, he's a bust, and he's never going to be good because his passing numbers were so bad this season. And I like the way you guys talk about like the need for development with him, where it's like, it's not about the ability to like read a defense per se, but you also need to speed up. So I guess the way I want to frame this to you is like, would you describe it as like, he needs to speed up his process, but not his processing? Like how do you sort of differentiate where Justin Fields needs to grow?
Well, Lorin, I know we're going to get into a lot of this, but I feel like the starting point of the Justin Fields conversation coming into this year and coming out of last year is how can the Bears be better around Justin Fields, right? And so I think mission accomplished there in so many ways with what they've done with the offensive line, running back room. I mean, they've upgraded every position, receiver, tight end, running back, O-line. It's all better. So that's great. We like that. And I like Luke Getsy, right? So there's a nice foundation to work from with the improved infrastructure and a coach that I really like in Luke Getsy. Then you kind of get to Justin Fields and you're like, okay, well, how can he take a step? What do we like? How can he take the step forward that everybody wants him to in year 3? And I think I do cling to a lot of the dynamic stuff that we love, the ability to run, the ability to improvise and create off script, the ability to hit some really, really impressive throws down the field, right? There's a big play component to Justin Fields that I absolutely love and everybody should love. And so you're now kind of wondering, okay, well, what's next? And I think it is just being able to speed up his process. And one thing that Kyle really went into on our podcast was the cadence, particularly with some of the quick stuff. And again, I like the talent around him now to execute some of the quick stuff, but there was probably some issues that we identified with just the rhythm with his drops and the footwork and being able to be synced up with the route concepts and putting himself in good positions from a footwork perspective to get the ball out of his hands and get his hand out of his hands on time and accurately to his weapons, particularly when working kind of the quick stuff. And it's not that he doesn't know where to go with the football. It's not that he doesn't make good decisions. It's just a picking up the pace with the cadence and the rhythm of what he's trying to do. And as that happens, as he becomes more aligned with the protection scheme, more aligned with the routes and their landmarks, he's going to be in better positions to get the ball out on rhythm accurately and into the hands of, a supporting cast that we feel a lot better about right now than we did last year.
Yeah, it feels like it should be easier to be on better timing with receivers when you've got better receivers now that you can trust to be at their landmarks on time when you need them to. Guys like, DJ Moore coming over from the Carolina Panthers. I know you were a big fan of him in Carolina. And I feel like we in Chicago don't necessarily we've never had really good wide receivers. I mean, Brandon Marshall for a little while there, but we haven't had a number one wide receiver in a while come in and be like the guy there. And I don't know that we can comprehend the type of impact fully that can have on a quarterback. And I'm curious too, with your perspective with Stephon Diggs coming to the Bills for Josh Allen a few years ago, just how monumental can something like this be when it pushes all the other receivers down one on the depth chart and just gives you something that's that much more reliable, that your quarterback knows he's always going to be there when I expect him to be there, where I expect him to be.
Yeah, I think it's huge. You want to have a weapon in your passing game that you can really funnel the passing game through. And that hasn't existed yet for Justin Fields with the Chicago Bears. It now does in the form of DJ Moore. And I'm a big DJ Moore fan going all the way back to his time at Maryland. And I live in Charlotte. And so I've had a great opportunity to really appreciate the player that he is. And I go to Panthers camp all the time and well acquainted with the type of teammate he is, the type of practice habits he has. And then of course what he's shown on the field. But my favorite thing about DJ Moore is just how, no matter what the circumstances have been, whether it's Maryland, whether it's Carolina, the guy has been able to produce, and he's really yet to have top-tier quarterback play, or even above average quarterback play or average quarterback play. I mean, at Maryland, they were down to their third quarterback within the first few games of the season as last year. There, he was the only Big Ten receiver that season to get 1,000 yards. It was him at Maryland. And then he goes to Carolina, and we know what the revolving door has been there over the last few years at quarterback, but he still finds ways to produce. He's one of the most productive young receivers in the history of the NFL, right? What he's been able to do to this point. And so I love that. I love that about him. And he's a do-everything player. There's not limitations here. He's a guy that can uncover quick. He can get vertical. He's got ball skills. He can win in contested situations. He's really good with the ball in his hands. And so that component plus the age here, I mean, there's just a lot to love about his insertion into this lineup. And there were just times where I was watching the offense in our study for our conversation on Monday, and I'm like, yep, DJ Moore is a better option for that play. And now they have him. And like you said there's a domino effect here where now everybody kind of just takes a step down, Mooney. And I think he's a very good complementary receiver to DJ Moore. I love Emmanuel Mooney. And Darnell. Then even Chase, Emmanuel Mooney, Darnell Mooney. I'm sorry about that. Yes. Cole Kmet, even same things. These guys are going to benefit from DJ Moore being in there. I think there'll be a lot more efficiency across the board for Justin Fields in this passing game.
This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by Built Bar, the world's best tasting protein bars. And I know I eat a Built Bar every single day. I actually just placed a reorder for a new flavor to get their very vanilla Built Bars. I haven't got to try those yet, and I'm really excited to because Built Bars are delicious. They're soft, they're easy to chew, they taste like candy bars. But somehow, Built Bars are also actually good for you. They're low sugar, low calories, high fiber, and high protein. It's truly the best of both worlds. The nutrients of a protein bar, but the deliciousness, the sweet treat, the guilt-free snack of a candy bar. I don't know how they do it, but you got to check them out for yourself. You can get all the amazing flavors at Built.com, or you can get them even sooner in person at your local Walmart or Sam's Club. If you head over into Walmart near their pharmacy section, you can get a 4-bar box of their cookies and cream bar, their double chocolate bar, or their coconut puffs. And if you're close to a Sam's Club, you can run in there and get a 13-bar box of 2 of my all-time favorite flavors, the Brownie Batter Puff and the Churro Puff. Try them for yourself. Tasting is believing, and you will thank me later. We're talking with Joe Marino here from Locked On NFL Scouting and Locked On Bills here on the Locked On Podcast Network. And as we talk about this Justin Fields supporting cast, obviously an investment in the offensive line this offseason with Darnell Wright in the first round and Nate Davis in free agency. You guys, I really like the way you described it on the podcast, that the Bears have some people movers on the offensive line. They're going to be able to run block pretty well. Maybe still some questions about pass protection just in terms of guys needing to develop there. But like, how would you sort of compare, as you guys have done these individual team deep dives? I know you're not through the entire league yet, but like comparatively this offensive line to other teams in the league, does it feel, more middle of the pack? Or I guess, especially when you're talking about like being stronger in the running game and weaker in the pass protection, I guess what level of confidence do you think we should have in this group?
Well, we're through 8 teams, so we got a lot of ground to cover still. But I will say this, I mean, we've looked at a lot of offensive lines, and we're generally familiar with all of them, right? This is just kind of a really just take the time to really get, familiar with each team. What's unique about the Bears is that there's not a position outside of Darnell Wright, who's a top 10 pick as a rookie, where we don't have them graded as at least an adequate starter. And that's part of what we're doing is we're categorizing every player on every roster as either a roster cornerstone, quality starter, rookie, adequate starter, replacement level, quality, depth, so on and so forth. There's different tiers for every player. And in Braxton Jones, Cody Whitehair, and Nate Davis, we have them as adequate starters, right? That's a nice baseline to know that you have that. For Tevin Jenkins, we put him in the bucket of quality starter. Like, we've seen enough from Tevin Jenkins to believe that this can be an impact starting guard. And then even Braxton Jones, as a rookie, we went ahead and labeled him an adequate starter. That's pretty rare. Usually we want a little bit more of a sample size to put a one-year player, that's all we have, into that type of bucket. But I think we're really comfortable with what he's shown. And so now your wild card's your top 10 pick that we know is going to be able to come in and be an impact run blocker. Obviously, some of the pass pro stuff, you have some questions there, but watch him against Will Anderson if you want to feel good about his pass pro upside. And if he can get his hands on you, he's really, his clamps are really, really firm. Nobody's going through his cylinder, right? You got to test his edges and you got to win with speed against Darnell. But I think that they have a really good group here. And for a lot of these other units, they got guys that are starting that we label as quality depth. They have guys that are starting that we have incomplete evaluations, replacement level starters. We don't feel that way about the Bears. And then I think the other side of that's important for us to mention is that now you have good depth players in Lucas Patrick. You have good depth player in Larry Borum, who's been able to hold his head above water despite, not a whole lot of fans coming out of college. And he's had his opportunities, and I think he's been reasonable. And so there's a couple of nice depth pieces here. We'll see with Alex Leatherwood, right? We'll see. But there's a lot more to this offensive line that we like right now than we certainly did last year. And I think they run blocked pretty well last year. I think collectively you want to see the growth in the pass blocking department.
I know you're also a big fan of what the Bears have going on in the backfield, and you were teasing sort of I don't even know if it's a hot take when you add the rookie draft pick in there, but that you lose David Montgomery, you add Dante Foreman and Roschon Johnson, and it's an improved Bears backfield. Another former Carolina Panther that I know you've seen a little bit of, but of course Foreman was in Houston and stuff before that. I guess what gets you excited about that group in particular and Foreman at the top?
Well, I'm a big fan of Deonta Foreman. Loved him coming out of Texas, and then he had that Achilles injury, which is typically the kiss of death for running backs. But Deonta Foreman said, I don't care about it, right? I'm going to be the exception here. And the dude comes in 2 years ago and replaces Derrick Henry. Lorin, that rushing offense was every bit as good with Deonta Foreman as the lead back as it was with Derrick Henry. And then he goes to Carolina. They, trade away Christian McCaffrey. And that running back situation was every bit as good with Foreman as it was with McCaffrey, right? And so I just think he's a good football player, and obviously he's big and physical and he's explosive, and I really like the way that he plays the game. And I'm not sure there's a drop off from him to David Montgomery. I think he might even be a more dynamic version of a David Montgomery player. And I thought there was just times where Montgomery was C3, get 3. There wasn't a whole lot that really moved the needle for me. I thought he was very average. And so you have him now to go with Khalil Herbert, who I mean, Bears fans know who he is, right? He's exciting as a complimentary player. Roshan Johnson is a nice mid-round draft pick. And then even Travis Homer, who has some athleticism, can pass block, can catch it a little bit, will be an impact special teamer. I think that this running back situation is objectively better right now than it was coming out of 2022.
Yeah, and after David Montgomery had some quotes just the other day too, saying he was getting tired of losing in Chicago and he's not endearing himself to the fan base anymore. So I don't think there's going to be too many hard feelings in that transition. But Joe, there might be a little bit, I don't know if hard feelings is the right word, but the downside here with the Bears, it's sort of the elephant in the room when we talk about this Chicago Bears roster and move over to the defensive side of the ball. This defensive line is bad. I mean, there's no getting around it. And I was going to ask, I know you've only done 8 teams. So I was going to ask, is this the worst defensive line in the NFL right now? I know you're generally, up on every team's defensive line, and we'll see exactly what the rest of the offseason look like. Still time to add more there, but is this as bad as it gets?
The Cardinals might have something to say about that, but no, this is a concern. Jokes aside, it's not good enough. This is a situation where I see a lot of depth players. I don't see a whole lot in the way of starting caliber players that would be preferred starters, right? Maybe Andrew Billings is probably your best option there, who over the last couple of years has been a reasonable A-gap defender. But I mean, Justin Jones, DeMarcus Walker, Rasheem Green, these guys don't move the needle for me. Travis Gibson, I thought 2 years ago was a decent reserve player. And then, he was asked to do more last year, really didn't take a step. Dom Robinson, interesting toolsy draft pick from last year. But you're really, to me, in trouble with this D-line. And, hopefully Dexter, Gervin Dexter and Zach Pickens as, day 2 picks with some athletic upside can realize their ceiling and potential very quickly. But yeah, this is a concern for me with this roster. I'm sure it is for just about anybody that's familiar with these players. It just feels very, very underwhelming.
What kind of ripple effect can that have in particular on this defense? I know we had you on to talk about Tremaine Edmonds this past offseason, this past March when the Bears signed him, and how much he improved when the defensive line in Buffalo got better, and now he's coming to Chicago where it's going to be a bit worse. But also a lot of young guys in the secondary that draft picks this year and last year, and not a lot of experience overall at that position. How much is this a concern beyond just, hey, it's not good that you're not going to be able to rush the passer that well, but then also it makes everybody else's job more difficult?
Yeah, no question about it. That's the concern here, especially, I mean, look at these linebackers, what they've paid to have Tremaine Edmonds and TJ Edwards, both players that I like a ton. I mean, I came on a couple months ago and talked about Tremaine Edmonds and raved about him, and I meant every word that I said, but there's one thing that Tremaine's not necessarily a strength of his game, and that's being a take-on downhill player. And you kind of expect that for his size, 6'5", 250 pounds. You think he'd be a good physical downhill player, but he's really never been able to be consistent with stacking and shedding and block deconstruction. He's a guy that, is really going to be at his best when he can run free. And that's true for just about any linebacker, right? That's not a unique thing to Tremaine Edmonds, but I wouldn't say that block deconstruction is a strength of his game. And so I think you kind of spoil what you have there. And especially TJ Edwards. I mean, the transition from playing behind the Philly defensive line to this is very, very significant. And he's not a guy that has, plus athleticism. So I think you kind of spoil your investments at linebacker. And then, you got some exciting youth in the secondary, but I mean, these guys are gonna have to cover for a while, right? You want your rush and your coverage to be married up, right? And I am nervous that there's not enough pass rush potential here to take heat off of a young defensive backfield that has a lot of talent, but they're going to be stressed with the amount of time that they're going to have to cover.
Let's talk about that young defensive backfield a little bit. Last season, Kyler Gordon and Jaquan Brisker stepped into big starting roles pretty much right away, and I don't know, it felt to me like the two of them were on a fairly, I don't want to say opposite, but a little different tracks as far as how well they played and how, I guess, optimistic I am. I want to start with Kyler Gordon, though. It's tough for a rookie cornerback to be thrown in the NFL and playing against, big time wide receivers and to thrive in that spot, especially as you mentioned, like even the defensive line last year was not that great. It's not like it got much worse this offseason. It just didn't get much better. So I don't know how much do you look back at Kyler Gordon last year and say legitimate concerns about how well he's translating to the NFL, and how much of that is like, well, he was in a kind of a tough spot and it was a difficult ask of him anyway to play slot and on the outside.
Yeah, I think you kind of hit on some of my key points already. First of all, he played both, right? Because I was in depth with the Bears all year last year. They were part of my pro scouting responsibilities. And I was interested in that Kyler Gordon evolution where, that's a lot. Those are different positions, right? It's not, I think we are the Madden society of just kind of plugging in guys. Playing in the slot and playing outside there, it's a different position altogether, right? I mean, you have run fit responsibilities in the nickel, you have different coverage alignments and spacing on the outside. That's a hard ask. And if I'm not mistaken, with Kyler coming out of Washington, I mean, he wasn't necessarily like a super experienced player, right? So that was a big ask for him. And I think it's good that he was able to show some high level moments. I'm certainly clinging to that. And I think that kind of failing forward is helpful, right? So I think he'll be better for his experiences that he had last year. And I thought that there was some good stabilization at times. And so I think a more defined role for him this year with the season under his belt will position him to be a guy that takes a step in 2023.
And on the reverse of that, you raved a bit about Jaquan Brisker in your podcast there with Kyle on Monday. What did you see about him that was so encouraging, and where do you sort of see then the trajectory from here?
One of my favorite things about Jaquan Brisker, and I guess this is kind of a blanket statement for young players in general, is, I think about the player I watched at Penn State and why I really liked him as a prospect. And then, oh, cool, I saw the same stuff with him in the NFL, right? You want to see translatability of what a player brings to the table. And so whether it was being physical and playing downhill and being able to tackle, or some of those, high-level moments of playing the ball and, being disruptive at the catch point, you saw that from Brisker. And I thought, his play really, I thought we saw the best Eddie Jackson that we've seen in 3 years last season. And I thought that went hand in hand. And so I'm excited about how that pair can grow together. And, I thought, he was a more consistently impactful player throughout the season last year than what we saw from Kyler Gordon.
So I guess sort of big picture, I know you guys weren't doing these podcasts as a way of like, ranking how all the teams are going to pan out or anything like that. But I don't know, where do you sort of see where expectations should be on a Bears team like this, where it's like, yeah, a lot of stuff is better around fields in the offense, but a lot of youth and a lot of question marks on defense. I guess where does that sort of leave how we should expect this team to perform this season?
Well, I mean, you're right in that we haven't done this necessarily for that purpose, but we're getting there, right? So once we get the entire league evaluated, we're going to have so much content that we can branch off with that, where we get into some win-loss predictions, and we even take the time to, now that we've categorized every player, that means we've categorized every position group, and we can really look at how those stack up and do some really fun comparative stuff with the rosters entering the season, so we can have the right expectations and mindset for these teams. And so I think that the good news here is that I think this team is better. I think their talent is better objectively. You like that there's young players that are, rookies, but also guys that are entering their second and third season that are appealing. It's hard to sit here and say, do I think the Bears are a playoff team? I think they can be, right? It's that impossible. I was talking with a Packers fan. Literally, I had a Packers fan over last night for dinner. We had steaks. And he was, of course, I'm the football guy. We're talking about the Packers. And he's like, what do you think? I was like, well, I don't know. You're in competition with like Seattle and the Giants and the Vikings to potentially be the 7th or 6th seed. Why can't the Bears be part of the conversation, right? I mean, a lot of turnover in the division. The NFC, is not a stacked conference by any means. I mean, why can't the Bears be last year's Giants or last year's Seahawks, right? I think it's possible. I'm not ruling it out, but as I get excited about that, I also am reminded by this defensive line, and I get nervous about being able to win up front on defense, that to the degree that they're going to need to have that type of success. But I think this is at a minimum an improved team. I mean, could they double their win total? Sure. I mean, could they do a little better than that? Yeah. And I think that's good growth for year 2 of Matt Eberflus.
Excellent. Well, your analysis has been, like I said, spot on from everything that I've seen from the Bears and everything you've seen from the Bears. We've been aligned in a lot of ways on this, and I've really enjoyed hearing you and Kyle talk about it on Monday's Locked On NFL Scouting podcast. You touched on a little bit there, like some of the things you guys are planning to do with the podcast this offseason, but could you give us a little bit more of a timeline of like, okay, you're going through the teams now and then what, and how the rest of the offseason of Locked On NFL Scouting look for you guys?
So right now we're weaving together these teams, right? We're going through each team. We just did the Bears with some of the big time prospects, the Caleb Williams, the Marvin Harrisons, the Olu Fashanus, right? So we're going to, spend some time getting acquainted with the top prospects in the 2024 draft. But by about mid-July, we're going to be done with all the teams. And then that leads us into, okay, let's start ranking the quarterbacks. Let's rank the offensive lines, the defenses, the rosters in general, the rosters minus quarterbacks, right? There's so many different conversations we can have as we kind of work through the training camp and get into what everyone's waiting for, and that's the 2024 NFL or 2023 NFL season.
Well, we're excited about the 2024 season here in Chicago as well. That's supposed to be the bigger championship window. Joe, thanks so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it. And at this rate, we'll have you on again in a couple months to talk about something.
Sounds good, Lorin. Always a pleasure talking football with you.
Thanks again to Joe Marino from Locked On NFL Scouting and Locked On Bills for joining us on the podcast today. If you enjoyed our conversation, if you learned a little something, make sure you hit that subscribe button on Locked On NFL Scouting, but also, of course, here on Locked On Bears on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. That's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network. That's your team every day. We love our everydayers that really live through to that slogan, your team, your Chicago Bears, every single day. Because then every day you get your next opportunity to bear down.